Okay, I think we got most everybody in there. Again, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. This is the college process for students with average GPAs with Katie Charles, one of our lead counselors at Great Expectations. Prior to her 11 years at GE College Prep, Katie worked in college admissions and athletics at multiple colleges around the country, including Dartmouth and the University of Georgia. She also coached at the collegiate level, ranging from Division III to Division I schools, and continues to help students with college counseling and the athletic recruitment process. With that, I will let you take it away, Katie.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren. Well, good evening, everyone. And tonight we're going to be tackling the college process for students with average GPAs. And we're going to start this off by saying average seems to have become a bit of a dirty word in recent years, but understanding that average means you're where most students are. That means this is what the process is going to look like for majority of the students across the country. And it's something we want to keep in mind because oftentimes we're going to get caught up in the idea, well, it's Harvard or bust, or my kid needs to be going to a very top school, or there's no option for them and no future. When the reality of the situation is we have more than 2,600 degree conferring universities in the US and another 1,200 two-year colleges. There's tons of options for students who want to go on to the college level and then can subsequently succeed once they've gone through that process. And the idea here is we're going to be talking about how do we help students find places where they will succeed. Their high school classes aren't necessarily an indication of your long-term success in the classroom. A lot of kids don't find their groove until they get to the college level. And so for many of our students, it's about finding communities and places that will foster their interest and excitement about their potential majors and will help them to really find what they want to do with their life. As I tell students all the time, the point of college is to find employable skills. That while your parents love you, they don't want to live in the basement until you're 40. And so our entire goal when we head off to college is to put ourselves in a great position for long-term success. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So what do we mean when we say average? And this is where a lot of students get caught up in the wording. For most of the students that we're talking about, an unweighted GPA between a 2.5 and a 3.5 is what we're talking about when we say average. That's what most admissions counselors will be looking at. That's what they would consider an average threshold. With that, sometimes your weighted GPA can be a little bit higher and you still might fall into this category. It's, are you taking honors and advanced placement? Are you giving yourself a little bit of a GPA bump? But across the board, what we're looking at are students who are taking a reasonable level of rigor, that they're maintaining a B average or so, and that dependent on what they're doing, they kind of fall into that category of work hard but aren't necessarily straight A students. When it comes to test scores, when we're talking about the average, anywhere from 1,000 to a 1280 in the SAT or a 20 to a 26 on the ACT is what we're looking for when we're talking about average test scores and average GPAs. Now, that might sound awfully low comparatively to some of the top end students or other kids particularly in the Pali community, but understanding that one, the educational system here in the state of California is pretty strong, particularly in the public schools, that Pali is one of the highest achieving in that group of the LA Unified School District. And so when we're looking at what the students are looking at, for the most part, our students are in the average to above average comparatively across the country. And that's a big piece of what we're going to be looking at. However, when we get into the admissions process, oftentimes, depending on where you're applying, you're going to be judged against other students from your own school. So having a good understanding of where you fall within your class, within your school, and you have an idea of maybe where other students are applying to give yourself the best opportunity to be competitive against other students that you'll be going against. So we're talking about all of this. The idea here is that we need to be conscientious and thoughtful when our students are building a list. If you fall in that 2.5 to 3.5 range, it doesn't make a ton of sense for your student to be applying to Stanford and Harvard and Princeton and not having some kind of a backup plan or a safety school involved in that. When we talk about target, safety, and reach schools, any school that is in the under 15% admissions rate, sometimes even under 20%, is going to be a super reach school for almost every kid in the country, no matter how good their GPA and test scores are. At that point, the differentiation is in the margins. But when we're looking at some of our schools that maybe fall outside of that top 25 academic structure, there's a lot of leeway and a lot of information that you'll need to take in order to be prepared for the college process as it goes with that. Okay. And the first step in all of this is parents and kids need to be realistic. What you should be looking for is considering what your potential major is going to be. There are some schools that would be considered easier to get into where certain majors are still going to be incredibly difficult. An example I often use is Long Beach State University would be considered a medium difficulty school to be admitted to, sometimes even on the safety end of things. However, if you're attempting to get into either their kinesiology or their nursing programs, those are pretty highly competitive, and you'll need to make sure that you fall within the expected range for the programs that they have available. And when we're talking to students, there are some schools where most of their academic majors are on the super upper end, but they might have a couple where they're really working to increase enrollment or they're trying to add students. And so there might be significantly more leeway, particularly for some of the niche majors. Okay. When we're talking about subject-specific programming, if you are interested in going into nursing or one of our progression-based majors like engineering, the idea is finding a place where you can succeed and where you can get practical experience early in your process. And when we're talking about some of the bigger and more competitive programs, that's incredibly hard. You'll be up against both upperclassmen and graduate students for an attempt to get into some of those programs. And the idea is there's a variety of schools around the country that can help you get into your programs a little bit quicker, even if you're not a 4.0 student or you're not tracking it at the upper end of the school. Okay. And when we go through that, the idea here is also going to be is where are you going to be successful? If you are a 3.2 GPA and you somehow squeak your way into a top end school, what happens if you're at the bottom of your class? If it's going to be a struggle every single day, it might be worth considering schools where you are more towards the middle of their admissions range so that you might have a better chance at succeeding as soon as you arrive there, okay, with less of a transition period. And that's a big piece of how we go about this with all students is let's talk about what those long-term considerations are. And this is where the next thing comes into play is creating a priority list. When I'm talking to students who fall into this range, a lot of times those students are the type of people who might benefit from smaller class sizes, more personalized attention, taking a look at schools, trying to find the student to professor ratios, seeing how your students might be able to succeed in the classroom and the level of support that they're going to be offered on campus. What school is best fit for your needs? If you're looking for study abroad programs, if you're interested in, you know, internship opportunities, which schools are going to get those outcomes and allow you to really work within that while putting you in the position to succeed? If you're always playing catch up, so it's great to get into those top schools, but if you're always playing catch up, it's going to be really hard to take advantage of opportunities. So when we're taking a look at this, bringing that school list down to what makes the most sense when it comes to where your success can be found. The next one on this list is choosing schools you actually want to attend. This is often where one of our biggest fights, particularly between parents and students, is the parents have a list of schools we're like, yeah, these are schools we think would be great. And students have a list of schools, and the overlap between those two lists is not as significant as you would think. The idea here is, like I said earlier, there's almost 2,500, 2,600 four-year colleges and universities in the US. Okay. In order to get there, there's a school for everybody. Okay. As we go through all of this and as we take a look at things, is what are we going to do? How are we going to get there? And what are we trying to get out of it? You're looking for community. At most colleges, your students only going to be spending 3, maybe 4 hours a day in class. So when we're going through this is it in a place that they want to be? How are the location? Is it easy to get home if a student wants to travel back? What are they looking at from a social perspective? Does it include community programs or social programs that they want to be involved in? Does it have the major that they're considering, or is this a school that has a more broad-based major? Do they offer the ability to design your own programs? Those can all be ways for students to really take advantage of a variety of the programs that are on offer without having to be the kid that gets into the top program right out of the gates. Okay. And when you're accepted into that, and when you're looking at these schools, if you are in the mid range or even on the upper range of what a school is accepting, remember that often puts you in line for things like merit-based scholarship. So while if you get into a very top-end school, you might not receive any financial aid, and they might just say, hey, you just kind of scraped in, you're going to be here, and that's where we're at. For a school where you meet at least the middle range, if not the upper range of what they're attempting to accept, you might be in line for some significant merit scholarship, which means that it makes life a little bit easier and you can either save money to go towards graduate school later, or you're coming out with a lower cost of attendance overall for the college. So there are definitely some benefits to going to places where you are kind of in the average of what they're taking in. The other thing to know is outside of most of the very top end schools, testing requirements are something to consider. There's a large variety of schools that are either test optional or test blind in how they handle their admissions process. So if you have decent grades, but you're not sure your testing is going to work out and you want to present the most cohesive and best possible application, you may leave out testing. Or if you're a student that has shown maybe an upward trend in your GPA over 4 years, but you're still kind of working your way up and improving your GPA, if you have a really strong set of test scores, you may want to consider submitting them because it could help you at a variety of schools with the admissions process. So some of this is that know thyself portion of all of these things. And the final piece on here is thinking about what your potential long-term plan is. The goal here isn't for our students to know what their outcome is for the next 20 years of their life, but it is an idea of planning for the things that they're looking for. So say you want to stay close to home and you're interested in going to the UCs, but your GPA in high school classes may not make you super competitive for that straight out of high school. The junior colleges here in the state of California, quite a few of them are part of what we call the Transfer Acceptance Guarantee Program. So you could take your first 2 years of classes at a junior college. If you do well and the core curriculum that they require, then you will be accepted into the UC system schools. And it's something worth looking into. So while you might still be building up your high school resume or working to improve, you could potentially find your way into some of the top schools that you're considering by thinking about, hey, maybe I take the 2 year transitional period at a junior college and make my way up to some of those top end schools. You know, coming out of SMC, out of West Los Angeles, out of El Camino, there's a ton of students that can apply into UCLA, into UC Santa Barbara, and be accepted. And so it's worth looking into if those are some of your top choices, but you aren't necessarily going to be a highly competitive candidate coming out of high school. It's worth considering going that route and having an opportunity to take a second shot at that. And if you don't necessarily get in, you still have additional credits and the proof that you are capable of doing college level work that you could transfer into any other 4 year college in the country. When we're taking a look at all of this stuff, the things that we want to consider, we talked a little bit about the priority list already, but I want you to think about where you're going to be. First and foremost, we want to try to find the right fit for our students. Location is a big one. Here in Southern California, we generally find kids either want to stay here in SoCal, you know, they love it here, the weather is great, realizing they're in a pretty great portion of the country, or else they're trying to get as desperately far away from home as humanly possible. And for kids, it's one or the other, and helping guide them through the idea that, hey, maybe we consider both options, giving yourself a better understanding of what you're looking at. The first thing I ask students, a lot of our kids, particularly in this, are like, hey, I think I might be interested in colleges around the city of Chicago. And I ask them, how do you feel about cold weather in the winter? You know, helping them understand what this is going to look like and how that location preference can impact the students. Okay. What is it near? If you're picking a college and you're like, I like all of these schools and all they are is major urban campuses. Have you lived in a city? Have you visited? Do you have a good feel for what's going on there? Okay. The idea is that the location does matter. What are the schools have access to? What are the students surrounded by? How do they help nurture their students based on where they are located, right? And after graduation, where are their graduates going? So if you're picking schools and you're like, hey, most of their graduates, you know, stay within a 2 hour radius of campus after graduation, is that something that your student is interested in? And that's another thing to consider as they're taking a look at this. The second thing to talk about with fit is programs and majors. Again, for a lot of students who fall into what I would call the average category, most of them don't have a 100% clear idea where they want to go or what they want to do with their future. And that's okay. While there are some students who are definitely on the far end of preparing for their entire life by the time they've hit 10th grade, most students aren't there, and that isn't the norm. And so when we're talking to students about this, as we're getting closer to 16, 17, 18 years old, the wish list, the objectives are going to change. And the idea here is to be looking at colleges with programs and majors that offer some form of flexibility and offer strong outcomes for their students. Okay. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about outcomes. That is going to be a major theme for tonight because a lot of these schools that would be considered for average students have tremendous outcomes for their graduates. The first thing I talk to all students about is understanding a ton of students really want to go into business. This is one of the examples that I use. And when we talk about that, there are a ton of wonderful schools and almost every college in the country has some form of connection to the business world, networking opportunities, internships. And when I ask students what is the number one school that has the most CEOs across the country, invariably they tell me it's Harvard or USC or UPenn. But the answer is actually Penn State. So it is a large land grant state institution on the East Coast, is where most of our CEOs come from. When we talk about all of these pieces, there are some great schools that have tremendous networking opportunities where their alumni networks help the kids get jobs almost immediately upon graduation. And so when we're talking about all of these things, they're not necessarily schools where you have to have the super high-end grades to get in. But if you dive a little deeper into, hey, this is a school that accepts students within a mid-range of GPA, but they also have tremendous outcomes for their students when they're graduating. That's exactly what we're looking for because the name on the front of the sweatshirt matters significantly less than the outcomes that we're looking for as we work through this. The other big piece of this, as what I tell students is when we're talking about the outcomes, is working our way backwards. So if your student, no matter what their GPA is at the high school level, is interested in going into medicine, well, what field are they interested in going into potentially? And then work your way backwards. Take a look at the medical schools who produce top end doctors within that field. From there, come back the other direction and say, where did those doctors do their undergraduate? And each of these schools, as we take a look at it, will publish that data. Hey, we took X number of students from this college, from this college, from this college into our graduate or master's programs. And we will work our way backwards and to kind of reverse engineer where they want to go. Because you'd be surprised at the number of schools who don't only take graduates from those top 25 academic institutions. It's a pretty broad range, and students who are figuring it out and continue the upward trend from high school into college oftentimes have significantly stronger opportunities once they're heading out into the world because they've actually had to put in the work to get there. When we're looking at all of these things, this is a big piece of it. And it's understanding that your high school GPA, your high school test scores is only one portion of who your students are going to be in the long term. And as we continue to build on this, we're going to be looking at ways to help them continue succeeding and working their way upwards. If you want to go into engineering, here are schools, graduate schools in engineering. Here are where their undergrad students come from. Every undergraduate institution is absolutely going to be publishing where their students go after graduation. So taking a look at some of the potential outcomes for your students is incredibly important because while they may have had to work really hard to get into a school and it may not be at the name brand recognition or top 25 that we're talking about, there's a really good chance that if they go somewhere that is an excellent fit for them and they can succeed, that they can then move on to higher level institutions or into great jobs by having the networking opportunities and options that they were looking for. Now, here's the next big question. So say we're in that average range. You don't have necessarily a spectacular GPA. You aren't necessarily at the very top of your class, nebulous in that middle 50% category of the class rank, right? There are some things that you can continue to do to stand out. And the first one is extracurricular activities. And it's not having 700 of them. It's showing depth, it's showing understanding of a subject, it's showing building on something, it's showing passion for some kind of a subject. And it doesn't matter if you're a 4.0 student or a 2.5 student. This is going to hold true for everybody. And the idea here is that if you can tailor your extracurriculars to the potential style of program, then that you're interested in doing at the college level, then you have a really good chance of telling a great story that helps your students stand out a little bit more in the process. So things like, hey, I think I want to go into medicine. So in my undergrad, I took a junior college class in biology and I did a UCLA summer program in neuroscience and I applied for and did an internship and shadowing at a local hospital. Things along those lines where you can actually build a narrative that shows the schools that you are still preparing for a potential future, even if it doesn't necessarily reflect that in your high school GPA. The second piece of all of this is using unique essays and experiences. When colleges are reading an application, everything is very much black and white. It's like reading a resume without a whole ton of context. The place that your students really can add their voice and shine is through their essays. What about their experiences are they telling? How are they linking together what they want to do? What are they telling the admissions officer about where they want to go? As we're talking about this, is there are some places, particularly within both the supplemental essays for specific colleges, as well as your Common App personal statements and your UC personal insight questions, where you can give the college's context on your grades. Like, hey, I really struggled during the Palisades fires. Obviously, that's a big one with a ton of students going to virtual learning, some transferring to other schools. That is absolutely a place where you can have some impact and understanding and being able to talk to the admissions officers directly about why things look the way they do and what you've been doing to improve them. We also have the additional information section in the Common App is being used for a much broader range than it had previously been. And that's another place where you can add some context to your academic record and really help the admissions officer understand that you're doing work in order to be a great candidate for their school. The next one is no matter what point we are in the year and wherever we are at, we still want to show an upward trend in GPA. Colleges will understand they are not expecting perfection, particularly outside of the very top schools. Uh, you know, Even though it is one of the top 25, I always laugh when I hear the Stanford admissions rep one time said, "We can't accept everybody who's perfect, or we'd be the most boring campus on planet Earth." The idea here is the colleges want to know who you are, where you are, and showing them that you are invested in your future. So while you might only be a 3.3 overall GPA, if you started out rough in your freshman year and you showed improvement, that's going to look good to the colleges. Or say you had one bad semester and you bounced back. The colleges can take a look at that and understand, particularly if you're increasing your level of rigor in your class schedule. So trying to challenge yourself with some honors or even an advanced placement class. The admissions readers are going to have an idea that you are putting in the work and the time in order to improve yourself. So again, even if you're not shooting for those very top schools, when we're talking about schools where you are in the mid-range, you can set yourself apart by showing the colleges that you are doing the work to prepare yourself to be successful when you arrive on campus. And another one here is there's a couple of new things that the colleges have been doing, which includes interviews are not new. That's been around for quite a long time. But if you're the kind of person who speaks well with adults, is open and funny, and you present well in person, going the interview route is a really great way to be noticed. The other one is there are quite a few different video and like communication style application pieces now, like sitting down and having a conversation of somebody with a different viewpoint than you. There's more than a few colleges now that are using some of those tools to get a better feel for how students will interact when they arrive on campus. And you can genuinely set yourself apart and show them that you are going to be a highly valuable member of their community, regardless of GPA, by using those tools and showing them that you are ready for the social interactions of college. So we're going to jump in here and talk a little bit about resources that are available. And my favorite one, and the one that I think is horribly underutilized for most of the students, even the ones that I've worked with at Pali, is Naviance. So when you're creating your college list, this is the place that every student should start. This is a resource that is given to you by the colleges or by your high school that aggregates all of the college information for admissions from your school specifically. Okay. So when we go through this and within Naviance, at the end of the year, when students, you guys are required to put in your academic information, your test scores, your GPAs, and essentially Naviance will hold that information to get an average and an idea of what the students in your school are doing from an admissions perspective. Okay. And with this, what we can take a look at is when you're looking at colleges, there will be this beautiful little scattergram for anybody who has applied from Pali, usually within the last 5 years. So it's about a 5-year window of data that's available in there. And they can take a look at, you can see it in here. Hopefully you can see my little mouse right now. But you can see based on the students' GPA versus their test scores, who was accepted and who was admitted. So you can see kind of what the average GPA of students that were applying versus the students that were accepted and rejected, right? And this is available for every single college that you can look up within that platform. And so for the students going in and taking a look at like, here is, say, this is me. I'm this little person right in here. Okay. Um, I am a little bit below the average GPA, a little bit below the average SAT score, but they were still admitted to this institution, right? And then we have our person over here who was above both and still didn't get in. Okay. And so when we're taking a look at this and we're trying to understand how this works, the idea here is you can get a really good feel for what your admissions likelihood as is at a variety of schools. If you're the person whose John Doe is all the way down here on the other side, then it's worth if you really want to take a shot at the school, you'd have to go in understanding that this is going to be a super reach, right? So you can see in here with a 3.0 or 2.5 to 3.5 GPA, for this in particular school, some students were in that 3.5 range and were admitted. They happen to have really high test scores. Yes. And so those factors we were talking about that it can help you stand out, clearly the test scores, at least, if not also the essays, which we don't have a copy of, allowed this student to get a bump in the admissions and get in despite not being above the average GPA line. And you can see there's a couple of students over here, and all of them have positive test scores, but they are slightly below. This person is kind of our outlier that was admitted, right? Who was both below the GPA and below the test score. But as I said, you guys all have access to this, and it is a phenomenal tool. You can search colleges by the average GPA. You can get in there and take a look at kind of where you fall. And understanding that for a lot of schools, admissions wise, not only will you be up against the average applicant that is applying there, which for the Southern California students in particular, a lot of times we have a higher threshold for core curriculum than a lot of other states. We offer more honors and advanced placement classes than a lot of other schools. And so you are going to come in slightly above average for the most part when it comes to offerings and availability. But you'll also be judged against other students from your high school who are applying there. So if everybody else from your high school is kind of down in this range and you're this kid, you might get in because you're going to show better than the other students that are applying. And like I said, for this, it just gives you a really good understanding of what schools have previously accepted from your high school specifically. And the more, the kids out there, everybody, we just kind of Google the like, what's the average GPA? And what that doesn't do, particularly if you're looking directly at the AI overview that pops up on Google now, every time we ask that question, is you're not necessarily getting information that is relevant to your specific school. So like I said, this would be the first tool I would send every student to, and it's how I start most meetings with my students, is get into the Naviance, really dive into it and see kind of where you're at and where you fall for the schools that you're interested in applying to. Because our goal here is for you to be above the average line in quite a few things. And it's okay to be below it in some others, but making sure we have that balanced college list we're talking about. The second resource I would highly recommend is the Fisk Guide to Colleges. This we offer it through the company. We send this book out. We absolutely love it. It's available on Amazon. You can order it for yourself. It gets updated every year with the generalized admissions info and an understanding not just of the academic requirements, but of all the things that we talked about. What are students doing on campus? What are the most popular majors? What are the student outcomes looking like? It's a wonderful resource to get in there and understand what the school is all about. It'll even talk a little bit about the culture on campus and the things that are important, which is a great way to go about it. The other website I would highly recommend is one called Colleges That Change Lives. This started out as a book called The 40 Colleges That Change Lives, and it has morphed itself into a much larger organization. It's generally highlighting schools that you may not have heard as much about, but that are really tailored towards helping students in that maybe more in that average range, and why these schools have unique programming. So they'll do some pretty in-depth background work on different schools, different programs, and why they are so important for students. It's a great way to go in there and get a feel for schools you might not have heard of previously. It's a little bit broader, and in Southern California, I always struggle with this a little bit, is we don't have quite as much access to some of those small and medium-sized schools. The UC and the Cal State system eats up a significant chunk of our colleges and universities here. We only have maybe 20 to 25 smaller schools that would fall in that range. And it's a mix between kind of the smaller religious institutions and, from an athletic perspective, what we would consider D3 schools here in Southern California, but they're simply not as prevalent as we see around the rest of the country. And so The Colleges That Change Lives highlights by region. So if you're interested in staying on the West Coast, you can go to the West Coast region and see the schools that they recommend and why. If you want to go to the East Coast, it'll dive into some more nuanced issues with schools, give you a better feel for some options that might be available there, particularly for our students who fall into this average range. It's a wonderful tool for that. And my final one, which is always my plug for your wonderful college counselors, Karen and her staff in your counseling office do a tremendous job of really trying to help students tailor resources and tailor their college search for where they can succeed and making sure they have a good balanced list. So when we're talking with students, make sure you use all of your resources. Pop in, get to know the counselor who's going to be in charge of your file. Try to get a good feel for who they are and get some face time with them because they're also going to be responsible for helping with your process when it is time to apply. Um, maybe not this week or in the next couple of weeks because we are hitting the first round of admissions deadlines for our seniors right now. But I highly encourage all of the students to get in to meet your counselors, to spend a little time in that office. I've been in there. You have some pretty tremendous resources available to you. And I think it is absolutely worth looking at what you have and getting to know your college counseling staff. They are the ones that bring us in to have this conversation with you. So we have them to thank for tonight's presentation as well. And with that, we come to the end of me talking nonstop for the evening. So at the moment, if you have any questions, I believe I saw at least one pop into the chat box. Lauren, are you?
Yes, yeah, there was one question. I did answer it, but I will let everyone else know as well. The question was whether or not this is going to be recorded, and the answer is yes. And anyone who registered, whether or not you attended or not, will receive a link to the recording tomorrow, typically by the afternoon at the latest. It just depends on how long it takes us to edit the video itself, but usually you'll get it by sometime between 2 and 4 p.m. If you don't receive it for whatever reason, then please feel free to email contact@gecollegeprep.com on the screen right there, and we would be happy to send it your way. And then, as Katie mentioned, we've got the link for Pali High offerings up on the screen right now. In addition to the webinars that we're doing, you guys also have kind of a plethora of diagnostic options to do. You can do ACT and SAT diagnostics that are going to benefit the Pali PTSA. 100% of the proceeds go straight to Pali PTSA, so it's a great fundraiser for you guys. And then we also have group tutoring options as well for those of you that are interested in that. And then at the bottom, we've got your complimentary one-on-one consultation with either Jen, our founder, or our director of counseling, Daniel, and either one of them would be happy to speak to you guys about the offerings that we have. I don't see any other questions in the chat. If anybody has one, though, now is the time. This is your chance to ask Katie.
If you have anything specific, this would also be the time to ask it. So feel free.
Give everyone a couple minutes. Let's see. No, I think actually it looks like we're good. Okay, so if anyone has any questions that you think of after the fact, our information is up there. Call us, email us, whatever is easiest for you, and we would be happy to assist. Katie, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it, and good night, everybody.